The morning I was supposed to secure the biggest deal of my career, I stood inside a glass tower built on 15 years of sacrifice, and felt it all begin to crumble because one man I'd never even noticed wasn't where he was supposed to be. The elevator doors closed behind me with a whispering sound that felt far too calm for the chaos in my chest. My reflection stared back at me in the stainless steel panel. Perfect hair, pressed suit, practiced smile. The face of a woman who could hold $1 billion empire together with poise and a signature. But beneath that thin armor, my pulse was unsteady, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I adjusted my Hermes blazer for the third time in 5 minutes, an unconscious ritual that had become my substitute for prayer. The numbers above the elevator blinked upward, 31, 32, 33, each one counting down to judgment. Floor 37. The day's verdict. I whispered to myself, "This is it, Victoria. Don't fall apart now." For anyone watching, it was just another morning at Sterling Dynamics, the company that bore my name and carried my soul. But for me, it was the culmination of 15 years spent clawing my way out of obscurity. I had built this empire from a cramped studio apartment, surviving on instant noodles and sheer defiance. I had poured my youth, my relationships, and my sanity into a vision no one else believed in. Now, that vision stood 20 floors above the Dallas skyline, overlooking a city that finally knew my name. But success, I'd learned, has a cruel sense of irony. It never lets you rest. When the elevator doors opened, the familiar scent of polished marble and fresh lilies hit me, the perfume of power. The 37th floor gleamed, every inch of it a reflection of control. My employees smiled and greeted me as I passed, each, "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," carrying that subtle mixture of admiration and fear. They thought I had everything under control. They didn't know my stomach felt like lead. Because today wasn't just another board meeting. Today was everything. 3 years of negotiation had led to this morning, the final signing with Chen Corporation from Shanghai. $50 million. A deal that would expand Sterling Dynamics into Asia, triple our market value, and silence every rival who'd ever called me too ambitious, too emotional, too female. This contract wasn't just business. It was redemption. I clutched the mahogany briefcase tighter in my hand, the one containing documents that represented my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. Just get through this, I told myself. Smile, deliver, seal it. Then my assistant, Jennifer, appeared beside me, tablet clutched against her chest, her face pale. That alone was enough to make my pulse spike. Jennifer never looked pale. She was my calm in every storm. "Mrs. Sterling," she began, matching my pace as I strode towards the glass hallway. "They're early?" I asked, not even looking up. 10 minutes, she said. "They're waiting in conference room A." "Good," I replied automatically. Punctuality meant respect in their culture. I had planned for that, too. Then her voice shifted. Thinner, uncertain. "There's a problem." Those 3 words hit like ice water. I stopped walking, heels echoing sharply across marble. "What kind of problem?" She hesitated. "Marcus, our interpreter, was in a car accident this morning. He's in emergency surgery. He won't make it." For a moment, everything around me went still. The ambient noise of the lobby, the chatter of employees, even the distant hum of the city below. It all disappeared. "What do you mean he won't make it?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "I've called every translation agency in Dallas," she rushed on. "It's a holiday weekend. Nobody has a Mandarin business interpreter available at this hour. I tried Houston, even Los Angeles." "Stop." I could barely breathe. "You're telling me there's no one? Not one single person who can translate Mandarin at a professional level?" Jennifer's eyes shimmered with guilt. "Not in time for your meeting, ma'am. Mr. Chen's delegation speaks very little English. Without interpretation, there's no way to proceed." The words landed like bricks. No interpretation, no communication, no communication, no deal. No deal. No company. I'd built my empire brick by brick, decision by decision, scar by scar. And now it threatened to collapse because of one missing man. "How long do we have?" I asked quietly, forcing my voice to sound like steel. 15 minutes. 15 minutes, that was all. 15 minutes before Mr. Chen would shake his head, pack up his papers, and take his 50 million back to Shanghai. My mind raced through options like cards in a collapsing deck. None of them worked. I couldn't afford to lose this, not after 15 years, not after every late night, every sacrifice, every friendship that had withered under the weight of ambition. There were 3,000 employees who depended on me keeping calm, and for the first time in years, I didn't know how. I pressed a hand against the cold glass wall of the corridor, staring out at the Dallas skyline. My reflection stared back, flawless, composed, terrifyingly alone. The woman who had fought tooth and nail to be respected was one translator away from ruin. Jennifer's voice broke through my spiral. "I'm calling more contacts. Maybe someone can come by video conference." "Do whatever it takes," I said, interrupting. "Offer double their rate, triple it. Just find someone." She nodded and hurried away, leaving me in the marble silence of my own creation. I glanced toward the conference room down the hall. Through the glass, I could see the Chen team, 5 impeccably dressed men, seated in perfect posture, speaking quietly among themselves in Mandarin. Their patience had limits. I could feel those limits closing in. The air felt heavier with every passing second. I straightened my blazer, lifted my chin, and took one steadying breath. The CEO mask slid back into place, the same one I'd worn through every failure, every betrayal, every heartbreak. I told myself that control was still possible, that some miracle might appear. But miracles don't belong in boardrooms. They belong in stories. And yet, as I stood there in my glass fortress, staring down the collapse of everything I'd built, I caught a flicker of motion in the corner of my eye. A cleaning cart rolling slowly across the marble. A man in a faded uniform pushed it, humming softly to himself as if he had no idea that $50 million and 3,000 livelihoods were dangling by a thread 20 feet away. His back was to me, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, his movements calm, deliberate, invisible. I didn't notice him then. Not really. Why would I? He was part of the background, like the hum of the air vents or the distant traffic below. But what I didn't know was that the man pushing that cart would change the fate of my company, my life, and the way I saw the world. And as I stood there, helpless in a palace I'd built out of ambition, I had no idea that the man who would save me wasn't in a suit, wasn't on my payroll, and wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that room. Yet within minutes, he'd walk through those glass doors and rewrite my destiny. Sometimes the people you overlook are the ones quietly holding the threads of your entire world together, waiting for the moment they're finally seen. His name was Miguel Santos, and though I didn't know it then, he'd been walking the same hallways I ruled for months. Silent, invisible, and infinitely more extraordinary than anyone realized. I must have passed him 100 times, maybe more. Always the same quiet nod, the same polite smile, the same faded uniform with the Sterling Dynamics logo stitched above the pocket. I never stopped long enough to wonder about the man behind it. To me, he was part of the building. Like the marble floors, the hum of the air conditioning, the scent of lemon polish that clung to every corridor. While I commanded boardrooms, Miguel pushed his cleaning cart through the hallways of my empire, often working long after the rest of us went home. He didn't rush. He didn't complain. He hummed softly while he worked, a tune I'd sometimes catch faintly echoing when I left late at night. A hauntingly calm sound against the storm of deadlines and ambition that defined my days. I used to think people like Miguel existed on the periphery of success. Necessary, reliable, replaceable. I couldn't have been more wrong. That morning, as chaos brewed inside the executive offices, Miguel was already on the 37th floor, polishing the glass wall outside the conference room, where the Chen Corporation delegation sat waiting. He had a small photograph taped to the top of his cart. A little girl with dark hair and pigtails, missing one front tooth, smiling as if the world were nothing but sunlight and laughter. Her name, I would later learn, was Sophia. To everyone else, that photo was just a decoration. To Miguel, it was the reason he kept moving. Every late-night shift, every aching back, every insult swallowed quietly. It was all for her. He had come to Dallas 8 years earlier with nothing but a suitcase, a toddler, and a dream. Back in Mexico, he'd been Professor Miguel Santos, teaching international literature, fluent in Spanish, English, Portuguese, and Mandarin. He'd built a life around words, dissecting meaning, translation, and connection. But in America, credentials didn't always translate. Without the right documents, the man who'd once lectured about cultural bridges was now pushing a mop through a skyscraper he could never imagine owning. Yet he didn't resent it. He found dignity in small acts, a spotless floor, an organized cart, the simple pride of a job done right. His co-workers said he smiled more than anyone else on staff. They didn't know that behind that smile lived the ghost of a man who'd lost everything except his daughter. And his mind, sharp as ever, hidden beneath quiet humility. That morning, as he mopped the glass near the conference room, Miguel caught fragments of Mandarin floating through the air. He understood every word. "Too long," one of the Chen delegates was saying. "We have waited 3 years for this. If they cannot provide proper communication, how can we trust their coordination?" Miguel paused, his hand tightening around the mop handle. He hadn't spoken Mandarin since his teaching days in Guadalajara, but the rhythm came back to him instantly. The delegation's frustration was clear. They felt insulted, dismissed. He could see them through the glass wall, 5 men in tailored suits, checking their watches, whispering among themselves with a growing edge of irritation. Down the hall, he saw me pacing near the elevators, my face pale but controlled, my assistant frantically speaking into her phone. He didn't need translation to understand the desperation in her tone. He looked down at Sophia's photo, the one constant reminder of why he endured long nights and short paychecks. His little girl depended on him to stay invisible, to keep his head down, to survive quietly in a world that often refused to see him. And yet, as he listened to the sharp, clipped Mandarin conversation echoing through the conference room glass, something inside him stirred. A memory. A voice from long ago. His mother's, soft but certain. "Miguel, God doesn't give us gifts to hide them. He gives them so we can help others when they need it most." He had ignored that voice for years, content to fade into the background of someone else's success. But at that moment, watching tension rise between 2 cultures he understood more deeply than either side could guess, Miguel realized that fate was testing him again. He set the mop aside, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar urgency. The rational part of him screamed to stay silent, to remain invisible, to protect the fragile stability he'd built. But another part, the professor, the man he used to be, whispered that some risks are too important to ignore. He glanced down the hallway again. I was still there, frozen between panic and composure, the weight of 3,000 jobs pressing against my spine. Miguel inhaled slowly, eyes narrowing with resolve. The Chinese delegation was gathering their papers now. Mr. Chen spoke sharply to his associates, his tone final. "If Sterling Dynamics cannot provide even basic professional courtesy, we should return to Shanghai. There is no respect here." Miguel's breath caught. He understood every word. He looked once more at the photo of Sophia, the gap-toothed smile, the faith in her father's strength. He thought of how he always told her that good men act when it matters most, even if no one notices. Then, as if guided by something larger than himself, Miguel made a decision that would alter both our lives forever. He wiped his hands on his uniform, straightened his shoulders, and glanced toward the glass doors of the conference room. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. Inside, I was seconds away from watching my empire collapse. Outside, Miguel Santos, janitor, father, forgotten scholar, was about to walk into the story neither of us knew we were already sharing. And while I stood there preparing to lose everything I'd built, Miguel Santos, the man I'd never truly seen, was deciding whether to risk everything he had left to save me. It wasn't courage I saw when he walked into my boardroom, it was destiny, wearing a faded uniform and carrying the calm of a man who'd already lost everything once before. The atmosphere in the conference room was suffocating. I'd walked into hundreds of meetings before, hostile takeovers, investor standoffs, boardroom ambushes, but nothing felt quite like this. The air itself seemed to resist movement, thick with the unspoken tension between two worlds. Mr. Chen sat at the head of the table, posture precise, eyes sharp and unwavering. His team mirrored him perfectly, their silence far louder than words. Across from them, I placed my briefcase gently on the polished mahogany surface, masking the tremor in my hands. Every instinct in me screamed to stay composed, to perform the ritual of confidence I'd perfected over the years. But the interpreter's empty chair glared at me like a warning I could no longer ignore. "Mr. Chen," I began carefully, "thank you for coming all this way. I hope your flight was comfortable." He inclined his head politely, but the moment I spoke English, the shift in his expression was unmistakable. His assistant leaned toward him, whispering a translation. He responded in Mandarin, his tone polite yet distant. Jennifer, seated to my right, looked as helpless as I felt. We both knew what this meant. Without translation, our proposal, years of research, projections, and promises, was just ink on paper. I tried again, choosing my words with painful precision, praying tone could bridge what language could not. I want to express my deepest respect for Chen Corporation's history and philosophy. This partnership— Mr. Chen raised a hand gently, saying something in Mandarin that I couldn't understand but could certainly feel. His tone was clipped, final. His colleagues exchanged glances, and one began gathering documents. They were leaving. Jennifer's hand brushed my sleeve under the table, a silent plea for calm. But my mind was already racing ahead, to the lost contract, the angry board, the layoffs that would follow. My company was built on precision and control, and at that moment, both had abandoned me. I opened my mouth to speak again. I don't know what I planned to say, when a voice from the doorway broke through the rising panic. "Excuse me," it said quietly. Every head turned. A man stood just inside the doorway, his uniform rumpled, his shoes squeaking slightly on the marble floor. In one hand, he held a cleaning cloth. In the other, nothing but nervous courage. "I can help," he said. For a moment, no one spoke. The room seemed suspended in disbelief. "Miguel?" I said, confusion sharpening my tone. "This is not—" He looked straight at me, unshaken. "I speak Mandarin," he said simply. A ripple of surprise passed through the room. One of the Chen delegates frowned. Another raised an eyebrow. The sight of a janitor interrupting a multi-million-dollar negotiation would have been unthinkable, if it weren't happening right before our eyes. I blinked, uncertain whether to laugh, cry, or throw him out. "You speak," he nodded, fluently. And before I could object, he turned toward Mr. Chen, bowed slightly, and began speaking in smooth, fluid Mandarin, the kind of tone that comes from deep respect and lived experience. Every syllable landed with weight and meaning. His voice was calm, measured, confident, and impossibly human. Mr. Chen's face changed almost instantly. Surprise flickered first, then curiosity, then something I hadn't seen all morning. Warmth. They exchanged several sentences rapidly, too fast for me to follow, but I could feel the entire atmosphere shift. The chill that had filled the room began to thaw. I watched as the Chinese delegates leaned forward, nodding, even smiling. Miguel gestured with his hands lightly, not as a showman, but as someone weaving connection back into the conversation. Finally, he turned to me. "Mr. Chen says he appreciates your respect for his company and your patience," Miguel translated. He understands now that the misunderstanding wasn't neglect. It was unfortunate timing. He's willing to continue the meeting, if I can translate. I stared at him, barely breathing. The janitor who'd been invisible yesterday was now the bridge between saving my empire and losing it. "Yes," I managed to say. "Of course." The next hour unfolded like a dream. Miguel stood beside me, translating every word with precision, empathy, and a kind of artistry that transcended language. He didn't just convey meaning, he captured nuance. He softened my firm business proposals into gestures of respect, rephrased Mr. Chen's concerns with poetic tact, and somehow made two cultures speak as one. For every technical term, he found its human equivalent. For every cultural misstep, he offered context that saved us from misunderstanding. I watched him in silent awe. Gone was the quiet janitor who disappeared into the night. Before me stood a man radiating calm authority, a man who understood not just language, but people. Mr. Chen began to smile, even laugh occasionally, his formality easing with each exchange. The tension that had suffocated the room dissolved completely. At one point, Mr. Chen spoke at length, his words smooth and steady. Miguel listened intently before turning to me. "He says your company's vision reminds him of his own beginnings. Small, determined, built from struggle. He respects that." I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time that morning. When the meeting finally ended, Mr. Chen rose, extended his hand to me, and said in carefully pronounced English, "We continue, yes?" I took his hand, almost afraid to believe it. "Yes, we continue." As the Chen team left the room, still chatting amicably with Miguel in Mandarin, I stood rooted to the spot, staring at the man who had just saved everything. He looked back at me, a little uncertain, wiping his palms on his uniform like he'd simply done his job. But I knew better. I had built Sterling Dynamics on numbers, projections, and cold logic. And yet, in one impossible moment, it wasn't strategy that saved us. It was humanity. As I watched Miguel bridge worlds I couldn't even enter, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just a deal he'd saved. It was the first crack in the armor I'd spent 15 years building. I didn't know it yet, but nothing about my life or my heart would ever be the same again. After that meeting, I couldn't stop thinking about the janitor who had walked into my boardroom and, with nothing but words and grace, saved a $50 million deal I had spent 3 years building. The day after the Chen meeting, the Sterling building felt different. It wasn't just the lingering triumph in the air. It was something subtler, something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the echo of Miguel's calm voice, still resonating in my head. Maybe it was the quiet realization that I had been rescued not by strategy or wealth, but by a man most of my staff didn't even see when they passed him in the hallway. I sat in my office long after everyone else had left that night, the Dallas skyline glowing through the glass behind me, a reminder of how far I'd come, and how easily it all could have fallen apart. My briefcase lay open on the desk, papers spilling out. But my attention wasn't on the documents. It was on the question that had haunted me since yesterday. Who was Miguel Santos? I typed his name into our internal employee database, expecting to find the usual minimal entry for maintenance staff. Hire date, hourly rate, emergency contact. But when his profile opened, something in me stilled. Age 34. Position, night maintenance technician. Dependents, one daughter, Sofia Santos, age 7. Languages, Spanish, English, Mandarin, Portuguese. I blinked. 4 languages? For a janitor? There was no resume attached, no degrees listed, no notes about his background beyond a single line in the HR file. Previous experience in Mexico prior to immigration. Details unverified. Unverified. The word irritated me. Sterling Dynamics prided itself on precision, yet this man, who had just saved my company from collapse, was categorized like a footnote. I sat back, staring at his photo, the standard badge picture, poorly lit and expressionless. Even there, something about his eyes caught me off guard. They held quiet intelligence, the kind that comes from surviving more than anyone should have to. I picked up the phone and called Jennifer. "Get me Miguel Santos," I said. There was a pause. "The janitor?" "Yes," I replied. "Tell him I'd like to see him in my office tonight." When he arrived hours later, it was nearly 10. The building was empty except for the cleaning crew and the soft hum of the city outside. Miguel stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, posture respectful but uncertain. "You wanted to see me, Mrs. Sterling?" I gestured towards the chair across from my desk. "Please sit." He hesitated, as though unsure if he should. Then he lowered himself carefully, hands clasped tightly together. For a moment, I said nothing. I just studied him, the man who had somehow bridged two worlds with nothing but words. "I wanted to thank you," I began finally. "What you did yesterday. There are no words. You didn't just help. You saved a deal that keeps this entire company alive." He shook his head quickly. "I just did what anyone would have done, ma'am." I smiled faintly. "No. You did what no one else in that room could do." He looked down, embarrassed, fingers tracing the brim of his cap. "I'm glad I could help." Something in his tone, the humility, the sincerity, made me push further. "How did you learn Mandarin, Miguel?" He hesitated, clearly not used to being asked questions that mattered. Then, quietly, he said, "I used to teach literature, back home in Mexico." I blinked. "You were a professor?" He nodded. "At Universidad de Guadalajara. I taught comparative literature and translation studies. I wrote my dissertation on cultural bridges in language." He smiled faintly, as if amused by his own irony. "Now I mop the floors of a company that builds them." I leaned forward. "Why are you here then? Why are you working as—" I stopped myself before finishing the word. His eyes met mine, steady, unashamed. "Because life doesn't always care how many degrees you have. When I came to the United States, I didn't have the right papers. My wife left when my daughter was 2. It was just me and Sophia. I couldn't wait years for validation. I needed to work, any work." The simplicity of it hit me harder than any speech could. I thought of all the nights I'd spent chasing power, terrified of losing status. And here was a man who had lost everything except his dignity, and somehow still carried more grace than anyone in my boardroom. He pulled a small photo from his wallet and placed it on my desk. "This is my daughter, Sophia." The picture showed a little girl with dark curls and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. I felt my throat tighten. "She's beautiful. She's my reason for everything," he said softly. "I tell her every night that if she studies hard, she can be anything she wants. Even when the world doesn't see you, you have to see yourself." I couldn't look away. His voice carried no bitterness, only faith, the kind I'd forgotten existed. "Miguel," I said after a long silence, "you shouldn't be pushing a mop. You should be leading conversations, teaching people how to connect the way you did yesterday." He gave a small, disbelieving laugh. "With all respect, Mrs. Sterling, no one hires a janitor to speak in boardrooms." "Then maybe they should," I said. He looked at me, confused, as I turned to my laptop. "Sterling Dynamics is expanding internationally," I explained. "We need someone who understands not just language, but culture. Someone who knows how to build bridges where others see walls." I looked up at him. "I want to offer you a position, Director of International Communications, full salary, benefits, and a chance to use what you've been hiding." For a long moment, he didn't move. His eyes widened, his mouth parted slightly, and I could see the disbelief warring with hope. "Mrs. Sterling, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," I said quietly. "You've already earned it." He sat back, blinking rapidly, his hands trembling as though afraid to believe this was real. You have no idea what this means for my daughter. For us. I smiled, though something heavy pressed against my chest, a mix of admiration, humility, and something I couldn't name yet. Miguel, yesterday you saved my company. Today I'm giving you back your purpose. Seems fair. He laughed softly, still stunned, and stood to shake my hand. His grip was strong but gentle, the kind of strength born from endurance, not arrogance. As he turned to leave, I found myself staring after him, the faintest smile tugging at my lips. For years, I'd surrounded myself with powerful men in suits who spoke of loyalty and strategy. Not one of them had ever shown me what true character looked like, until a janitor walked into my life. What I didn't realize was that giving Miguel Santos back his life's purpose would end up saving mine, in ways I was nowhere near ready to understand. For Miguel, it was a dream reborn. For me, it was the beginning of something I couldn't explain, a feeling that crept in quietly between the cracks of ambition and the sound of his steady voice. The morning Miguel started as Director of International Communications, I arrived earlier than usual. The 37th floor buzzed with its usual rhythm, the click of heels, the low hum of phones, the polite greetings that meant nothing. But beneath it all, something had shifted. There was a new name on the executive roster, one that didn't belong to the elite universities or the boardroom inner circle. A name that had once been typed into our payroll system under maintenance staff, Miguel Santos. When he stepped off the elevator that morning, it was like watching two worlds collide. The quiet resilience of a man who'd worked invisible nights meeting the sharp, expectant gaze of those who thought they understood success. He still wore humility like a second skin, but there was a new presence in his stride, a quiet authority that demanded respect without ever asking for it. His suit wasn't designer, but it was pressed perfectly, his shoes polished, his ID badge clipped neatly to his lapel. The same badge that once marked him as custodial. I watched from my glass office as whispers followed him down the hallway. Executives glanced up from their desks, polite smiles hiding their unease. People like Miguel didn't become directors overnight, not in this world, but Miguel didn't flinch under the weight of their doubt. He greeted everyone with the same calm smile, the same steady composure he'd shown in that boardroom the day he'd saved us all. By the time we entered our first leadership meeting together, tension had already formed a silent wall around the table. I could feel it, the skepticism, the judgment, the disbelief that a janitor had been given a director's chair. Patricia, our CFO, was the first to break the surface. "Victoria," she began cautiously, "I'm sure Mr. Santos has a valuable perspective, but given his non-traditional background, are you confident he's equipped to manage corporate communications at this level?" Miguel didn't even blink. He simply folded his hands on the table, his tone calm but unyielding. "I understand your concern, Ms. Goldman, but communication isn't about titles. It's about understanding. My background taught me that the hardest language to translate isn't Mandarin or English, it's respect." The room fell quiet. Even Patricia, who prided herself on always having the last word, looked momentarily disarmed. I spoke then, my voice sharper than I intended. "Miguel has already proven he can handle negotiations that every one of our experts failed to secure. I suggest we measure competence by results, not resumes." That was the end of the debate. Over the next few weeks, Miguel's presence reshaped the company in ways none of us expected. The Chen partnership flourished under his guidance, expanding into new collaborations across Southeast Asia. He hosted virtual cultural workshops for our executives, teaching them not just how to communicate internationally, but how to listen. His gift wasn't just language, it was empathy disguised as diplomacy. He remembered details about people no one else bothered to note. A partner's daughter's graduation, a vendor's sick mother, a colleague's quiet struggles. People started trusting him, often more than they trusted me. And I didn't mind. Every time I saw him in a meeting, explaining some complex concept with that effortless composure, I found myself admiring not just his intelligence, but his calm, the way he centered others, the way he made even the most cutthroat board members soften when he spoke. He reminded me that leadership didn't have to be loud to be powerful. But while Miguel was finding his place in the light, I began to notice the shadows in my own life. My success had come at a cost I could no longer ignore. My penthouse was immaculate but silent. My calendar was full, but my evenings were empty. The higher I climbed, the lonelier the view became. Some nights I'd catch my reflection in the window, a woman surrounded by luxury, but somehow hollow inside. And on those nights, I'd remember Miguel's story. The janitor who once pushed a mop to feed his daughter, who now walked these same halls with the dignity of someone who knew what truly mattered. One afternoon, I saw them both together for the first time. Sophia. She was waiting for him outside his new office, her little feet swinging from the visitor's chair, a backpack twice her size resting beside her. When Miguel knelt to hug her, the whole corridor seemed to light up. She handed him a hand-drawn picture, the two of them holding hands in front of a big building labeled Papa's Company. I stepped out just as Sophia's curious eyes met mine. "Are you Miss Victoria?" she asked brightly. I smiled. "I am." Miguel stood quickly, a touch of embarrassment in his posture. "I hope she's not—" "She's perfect," I interrupted. "Would you like to see the view from my office, Sophia?" Her face lit up as I led her to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. She pressed her palms to the glass and whispered, "Papa works up here now. It's so high." For a brief moment, the sterile, cold office I'd built around myself felt alive, filled with laughter, warmth, and something dangerously close to joy. When they left, I stood alone at the window, staring at the fading sun. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt that kind of peace, the kind that came not from achievement, but from connection. That night, as I closed my office, I saw Miguel down the hall, helping Sophia zip her jacket, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. The sight stirred something inside me I couldn't define. Admiration, yes, but also envy. He had lost more than I could imagine, yet somehow he'd held on to the one thing I'd forgotten how to keep: love. But as I stood there watching them disappear into the elevator's golden light, I felt the ground beneath my carefully constructed world begin to shift, because even as everything rose for us, something was about to collapse again. And this time, it wouldn't be business that was at stake. You don't realize how much someone means to you until the world starts falling apart. Again. And the only person who can hold it together is halfway across the world. The first sign of trouble came in an email, the kind of cold, concise message that carried the weight of disaster in every polite word. Due to recent communication concerns, we are reconsidering our partnership with Sterling Dynamics. Further correspondence is unnecessary. The sender, Klaus Müller, the CEO of Müller & Associates, our German manufacturing partners, and the cornerstone of our European expansion deal worth $30 million. I read the email 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. Reconsidering was a corporate euphemism for terminating. If Müller withdrew, the entire European branch of our strategy would unravel. Years of negotiation, months of preparation, millions in projected revenue, gone over a misunderstanding. I pressed the intercom. "Jennifer, get me Miguel Santos, now." When Miguel walked into my office 10 minutes later, I was standing by the window, staring at the skyline but not really seeing it. He read my silence instantly. "What happened?" I handed him the printed email. His eyes scanned it quickly, his brow furrowing as he absorbed the subtext. "This isn't about numbers," he said finally. "It's about respect." I turned toward him. "Explain." He sighed, setting the paper down. German business culture values precision and tradition. They interpret directness as professionalism, but arrogance as disrespect. Someone on our team must have crossed that line. He was right. A flash of memory hit me. Yesterday's video call, led by Richard Blackwood, one of my most aggressive negotiators. He'd treated the Germans like reluctant clients, not equal partners. I should have stopped it. I didn't. "Miguel, they're threatening to pull out completely," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "We're talking about $30 million in production contracts, not to mention our entire foothold in Europe. If they walk—" He interrupted gently. "We won't let them." There was no hesitation in his tone, no panic, just quiet certainty. "What do you suggest?" "I'll go to Frankfurt," he said simply. "Let me meet them in person. Words through a screen can't fix this, but empathy can." The words hung between us. I studied his face, calm, steady, confident in a way that grounded me when nothing else could. "That's a lot of pressure," I said softly. He smiled faintly. "Pressure is what turned me from a janitor into a director, remember?" Despite the tension, I felt a flicker of something warm, admiration, trust, maybe even something deeper I wasn't ready to name. "You'd have to leave tonight." "I'll pack light," he said. For a brief second, we stood in silence, the air thick with unspoken understanding. I trusted him, not just because of what he'd done, but because of who he was. "Bring it back, Miguel," I whispered. He nodded once, his eyes holding mine. "I will." Frankfurt greeted him with cold air and gray skies. The Miller and Associates building towered over the old city, its glass facade reflecting centuries of European history colliding with modern ambition. Miguel stepped inside, his posture straight, his nerves hidden behind calm professionalism. The receptionist greeted him with polite skepticism, but when he responded in flawless German, her expression softened. "Herr Santos, they're expecting you." Inside the conference room, Klaus Müller waited, tall, silver-haired, a man whose reputation for discipline preceded him. His handshake was firm but measured, his eyes assessing. "Herr Müller," Miguel began in German, bowing his head slightly, "I come to you with sincere apologies from Sterling Dynamics. We failed to show proper respect during our last communication. That was unacceptable." The German executive studied him for a long moment before replying. "Your Mr. Blackwood is confident." Miguel allowed a small smile. "Confident is good, but sometimes confidence without understanding feels like arrogance. I am here to rebuild understanding." That sentence, simple and human, changed everything. Over the next several hours, Miguel spoke to them not as a salesman, but as an equal, acknowledging their heritage, asking about their company's founding, listening as much as he spoke. He didn't pitch. He connected. He shared stories of how Sterling Dynamics had learned from their Chinese partners, how success wasn't born from domination, but from collaboration. During lunch, Miller asked him about his background. Miguel told him the truth, that he had once been a professor of literature in Mexico, that he believed business and culture were both languages of trust. Klaus listened, intrigued, then raised his glass. "To trust rebuilt," he said in German. By the end of the day, the impossible had happened. The partnership was not only restored, but strengthened. Müller agreed not just to continue the deal, but to expand it, an additional €5 million in new contracts. When the meeting adjourned, Klaus shook Miguel's hand and said, "Herr Santos, in 40 years of business, I have met few men who understand that words alone don't build relationships. Respect does. You have my respect." Miguel smiled, the weight of exhaustion and triumph mingling in his eyes. "Thank you, Herr Müller. I will tell Mrs. Sterling that you have given me the greatest compliment I could ever receive." When he called me that night, I was still in my office, pretending to work, but mostly staring at the clock. "The Frankfurt deal?" I asked, breathless before he could speak. "Saved," he said simply, and expanded. I exhaled a laugh, relief, pride, maybe even something dangerously close to joy. "Miguel, you're unbelievable." "I just listened," he said softly. "Sometimes that's all it takes." There was silence between us, the kind of silence filled with words neither of us dared to say. "Miguel," I said finally, "you've done more for this company than anyone ever has. You've done more for me than I can ever repay." "You don't owe me anything," he replied gently. We're partners now, aren't we? Partners. The word lingered like a spark. After the call ended, I sat alone in the dim glow of my office, the city lights reflecting off the window. I should have felt invincible. The company was thriving, the deals multiplying, our name spreading across continents. But beneath the triumph, something else stirred, a quiet ache I couldn't ignore. The more Miguel succeeded, the farther away he seemed. Each victory carried him further into the world, and further from me. As Sterling Dynamics soared higher than ever before, I should have felt fulfilled. Instead, I found myself standing at the window, watching the planes take off from Dallas International, and wondering when the man who'd saved everything I'd built would stop feeling like the only thing I was still in danger of losing. Sometimes success steals what it promised to give. It gives you the world, but takes the pieces of your heart you didn't realize you were trading. The months after the Frankfurt triumph were a blur of headlines, flights, and applause. Sterling Dynamics had become an international name, the kind whispered in corporate circles from London to Tokyo, and at the center of it all was Miguel Santos. He had become our secret weapon, the man who could walk into any room, any culture, and make strangers feel understood. His calendar filled with meetings across continents. Tokyo on Monday, London by Thursday, São Paulo the next week. Every deal he touched seemed to turn to gold. But with each success, I saw something changing in him. He'd return from trips with the same calm smile, but the light in his eyes was dimmer. His shoulders carried the fatigue of someone who had been giving too much of himself for too long. During our late-night calls, often to debrief after his flights, I'd hear the exhaustion in his voice. "How's Sophia?" I'd ask, gently steering the conversation away from business. "She's growing fast," he'd say with a tired smile I could almost hear through the phone. "She started piano lessons. I missed her first recital last week." The silence that followed always hurt more than I wanted to admit. He'd clear his throat after a moment. "But she sent me a video. She's getting really good." I wanted to say, "You shouldn't have to watch your daughter grow up through a screen." But I didn't. Because I knew the same kind of sacrifice. The nights I'd stayed at the office while birthdays passed. The relationships that dissolved under the weight of my ambition. We were both paying the price of success, and both pretending it didn't hurt. Every time he came back to Dallas, the building seemed brighter. Conversations in the hall grew lighter when he was near. Even the interns noticed it. Miguel carried presence without ego, a quality that couldn't be taught. But for me, his return meant something I didn't want to analyze too closely. I'd find myself listening for his footsteps outside my office, my pulse rising when he appeared in the doorway with that calm, reassuring voice. "How are you holding up, Mrs. Sterling?" he'd ask. "Better when you're here," I'd almost say, but never did. Instead, I'd smile and answer, "Same as always." We worked side by side through new ventures and negotiations, our rhythm so natural that sometimes we didn't need words at all. A glance across the boardroom was enough to know what the other was thinking. But that connection, that invisible thread, was starting to pull on me in ways I couldn't control. It wasn't just professional anymore. I realized it one night after another long meeting. The office was empty, the city outside painted in streaks of gold and shadow. Miguel had just left for the airport, his flight to London delayed. He'd called to let me know. "Get some rest," I told him. "You too," he said softly. "You work too hard, Victoria." Hearing my name in his voice, stripped of titles, of walls, left an ache in my chest I didn't know how to name. After we hung up, I sat in the silence, staring at the skyline, and whispered to myself the words I couldn't tell him. "You're the only part of this job that doesn't feel like work anymore." The next morning, Jennifer noticed. She walked into my office holding the day's reports, but paused before setting them down. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, glancing up. She hesitated, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You're different lately. Softer. Happier, even." I frowned. Different how? Different when he's here. I blinked. Hey? Miguel. She said it plainly, like she'd just read a headline I was trying to ignore. When he's in the room, you light up. When he's gone, you don't. I felt my pulse quicken, my defenses rising. Jennifer, I'm not judging, she said gently. I'm just saying I've worked for you for 6 years, and I've never seen you smile the way you do when he's around. I forced a polite laugh. We've been through a lot together, that's all. He's a friend. But even as I said it, the word felt wrong. Too small. Too safe. Jennifer tilted her head, unconvinced, then handed me the reports. Friends don't look at each other the way you two do. After she left, I sat there, staring at my reflection in the glass wall. She was right. I was different. Miguel had become the one constant in my unpredictable world, the quiet voice that steadied me when everything else felt uncertain. And the truth I'd been avoiding was now undeniable. My admiration had grown into something deeper, something dangerous. I told myself it couldn't go anywhere. I was his boss. Our relationship was built on respect and professionalism. But my heart didn't care about structure charts or policies. And as his responsibilities grew, so did the space between us. He was in different time zones more than he was home. Calls became shorter, rarer, and every time his name appeared on my phone, I'd feel that same mix of joy and dread, because I never knew when the call would come again. One evening, after a 14-hour day, I was gathering my things when the office door opened. Miguel stood there, still in his travel-worn suit, his tie loose, fatigue etched across his face. He looked like he'd been carrying the world, and maybe he had. Long day? I asked, trying to mask how my pulse spiked at the sight of him. He smiled faintly. You could say that? Something in his tone made me pause. There was a heaviness there, something unspoken. Miguel, what's wrong? He took a deep breath, stepped forward, and closed the door behind him. There's something I need to tell you, he said quietly. I set my bag down, heart tightening. He met my eyes, steady, searching, conflicted. I got an offer. I didn't know it yet, but the words that followed would test everything we'd built, our partnership, our loyalty, and the fragile balance between the empire we'd created and the emotions we were no longer strong enough to hide. He looked at me with eyes that held both love and goodbye, and for the first time in years, I didn't know whether to fight for my company or for my heart. Miguel stood in my office doorway, framed by the soft glow of the city lights behind him. His tie was loosened, his eyes tired, and yet there was something else there, something heavier. I'd seen him walk into meetings across continents, face down billion-dollar negotiations without blinking, but tonight, his calm was gone. He closed the door quietly, his voice low. There's something I need to tell you. The air seemed to still. Go on, I said, though my heart was already bracing for something I didn't want to hear. He drew in a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the folder in his hands. I got an offer. What kind of offer? I asked, trying to keep my tone professional, but my stomach had already started to twist. He hesitated before answering. Director of European Operations for Rossini International, based in Milan. The words hit like a punch I didn't see coming. Milan, I repeated softly. He nodded. They want me to lead their entire expansion division. It's a huge opportunity. Twice my current salary, a team of 200. Full relocation package. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. That's incredible, Miguel. They'd be lucky to have you. He looked down, almost ashamed. I haven't said yes. Why not? I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. Because, he said quietly, there's someone here I can't stop thinking about. The air left the room. My pulse thundered in my ears. Miguel! He cut me off gently, stepping closer. Victoria, I know what you're going to say. That this can't happen. That you're my boss. That it's complicated. He laughed softly, without humor. Believe me, I've told myself the same things 100 times. But it doesn't change the truth. I couldn't look away. The vulnerability in his eyes, raw, unguarded, was the same courage I'd seen the day he'd walked into my boardroom and saved everything. He continued, his voice trembling now. I came here to rebuild my life for Sophia, to find stability. But somewhere along the way, you became something else. The person who believed in me when no one else would. The person I think about when I'm thousands of miles away. Miguel, I whispered, my throat tight. You can't. I know, he said. And maybe that's why I have to leave. Because every time I look at you, I forget where the line is supposed to be. For a moment, we just stood there. Two people caught between everything we'd built and everything we wanted but couldn't have. I wanted to tell him to stay. I wanted to tell him that the thought of this office without him made the air feel too heavy to breathe. But the words stuck somewhere between pride and fear. Instead, I said softly, "You've worked so hard for this. You deserve it." He gave me a sad smile. Maybe. But deserving something doesn't mean it's right. Silence stretched between us, thick with everything neither of us dared to say. And then, my phone rang. We both jumped slightly. I glanced at the screen. It was the emergency line, the one listed under Sophia Santos, secondary guardian. My heart dropped. It's Sophia's school. Miguel's face went pale. I answered immediately. This is Victoria Sterling. A woman's voice, tight with urgency, came through the receiver. Mrs. Sterling, this is Mrs. Patterson, Sophia's teacher. We've called an ambulance. She collapsed during recess. She's conscious now, but she had some kind of seizure. Miguel was already on his feet before I could repeat the words. What happened? He demanded, voice shaking. She's being taken to Children's Medical Center. Please come quickly. I'm on my way, he said, grabbing his coat. I was already moving, grabbing my keys. I'll drive. We didn't speak as we raced through the night, the city lights blurring past. Miguel sat beside me, gripping the edge of his seat, whispering prayers in Spanish under his breath. Every red light felt like an eternity. I'd seen Miguel in every version of himself, calm, confident, composed. But this was different. This was raw fear. When we reached the hospital, he was out of the car before I'd even parked. The nurse at the front desk recognized his panic instantly. Sophia Santos, room 212, pediatric wing. We ran. Seeing Sophia in that hospital bed, small, pale, wires attached to her tiny wrist, broke something in both of us. Miguel dropped to his knees beside her, tears streaming down his face as he took her hand. I'm here, mija. Papa's here, he whispered. The monitors beeped softly, filling the silence between us. I stood near the doorway, unable to move, my heart pounding as if it were my own child lying there. When the doctor finally came in, Miguel shot to his feet. Is she okay? What happened? The doctor's tone was calm, but serious. It looks like a febrile seizure, a reaction to a high fever from an ear infection. It looks worse than it is, but she'll be fine. She just needs rest. Miguel's shoulders collapsed with relief. He buried his face in his hands, shaking. I reached out, placing a hand on his arm. She's safe, I whispered. He looked up at me then, eyes glistening, voice breaking. Victoria. I almost lost her. In that moment, the world around us, the deals, the titles, the ambitions, all faded into nothing. There was only a father and his daughter. And me, standing beside them, realizing how fragile everything truly was. As I watched Miguel cradle Sophia's tiny hand, I felt every wall inside me crumble. In that sterile hospital room, all the things I'd thought mattered, power, control, success, disappeared, until only one truth remained. Nothing in this world mattered more than the people we love. Love doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it crashes into your life in a hospital, waiting room, when everything else you thought mattered suddenly doesn't. The drive to the hospital felt endless, though later I would swear we got there in record time. Miguel didn't speak. He just stared out the window, his knuckles white against his knees, his lips moving in silent prayer. The strong, composed man I'd known, the negotiator who faced billionaires without fear, was gone. What sat beside me was a father on the edge of breaking. When we burst through the glass doors of the emergency wing, the world narrowed to fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. "Sofia Santos," Miguel said breathlessly to the nurse at the desk. 7 years old. She was brought in from Lincoln Elementary. The nurse typed quickly, glancing up. "She's in room 212. Dr. Chen is with her now." Miguel didn't wait for more. I followed him down the corridor, my heels echoing against the tile, my chest tightening with every step. When we reached the room, the sight of Sofia lying there nearly stopped my heart. Her skin was pale against the white sheets, her small chest rising and falling too fast. A soft beeping from the monitors kept time with my own racing pulse. Miguel dropped to his knees beside the bed, taking her tiny hand in both of his. "I'm here, mija," he whispered, tears slipping down his face. "Papa's here. You're okay now." The doctor looked up as we entered, offering a calm smile. "She's stable. It was a febrile seizure caused by a severe ear infection. Scary, but not life-threatening. She's a lucky little girl." Miguel nodded, but he couldn't speak. His shoulders trembled with relief as he pressed a kiss to Sofia's hand. I felt my own eyes blur. "Can she have visitors?" I asked quietly. The doctor nodded. "She's already been asking for both of you." "Both of you?" I turned to look at Miguel. His expression was raw, disbelief and gratitude tangled together. "She was calling for you?" he asked softly. I nodded. "She kept saying, 'Miss Victoria and Papa.'" He smiled weakly through the tears. "She always liked you." I pulled a chair closer and sat beside him. For hours we stayed there, the three of us in that small, dimly lit room, as night bled into early morning. Sofia slept peacefully now, her small fingers still curled around Miguel's. I sat close enough to hear his quiet breathing, to feel the warmth of his hand when I finally took it in mine. "You stayed," he said after a long silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course I did." He looked at me then. Really looked. The way someone does when they realize a truth too big to contain. "You didn't have to." "Yes," I said softly. "I did." For a while we just sat there, hands entwined, the rhythm of Sofia's steady breathing filling the silence. The city outside began to lighten, soft streaks of dawn pressing through the blinds. It was the first sunrise in months. That didn't look like another workday waiting to start. Miguel exhaled, his voice unsteady. "You know, I thought I understood what mattered. I thought success meant never having to feel powerless again. But sitting here tonight, watching her, I realized something." "What's that?" I asked. He turned to me, eyes glistening. "All the deals in the world mean nothing if I miss the moments that make life worth it." His words hit harder than he knew, because they mirrored my own quiet fears. All the lonely nights I'd spent surrounded by glass walls and empty silence, pretending that fulfillment could be measured in profits. I squeezed his hand gently. "You're a good father, Miguel. Sofia's lucky." He smiled faintly. "No, I'm the lucky one." He paused, eyes holding mine with a kind of honesty that stripped away everything else. "You didn't just save my job, Victoria. You gave me back my life." Something inside me broke then. Or maybe it healed. I wasn't sure which. Without thinking, I reached up, brushing away the tear that trailed down his cheek. His hand caught mine, and for a long, breathless moment, neither of us moved. The world outside faded. No boardrooms, no titles, no rules. Just two people sitting beside a sleeping child, realizing that everything they'd been chasing had led them right here. When he leaned in, it wasn't planned. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Our lips met softly, hesitantly, the kind of kiss that carried gratitude, relief, and something deeper we'd both been too afraid to name. It didn't feel like the start of something reckless. It felt like coming home. When we finally pulled apart, the first rays of sunrise had filled the room with gold. Miguel exhaled, his voice trembling. I don't know what happens next. I smiled, tears still in my eyes. Neither do I. But for once, that doesn't scare me. He looked back at Sophia, who stirred slightly in her sleep, and whispered, "Family. That's what matters." And as I watched him, a man who'd lost everything only to rebuild it with love instead of power, I realized he was right. Because in that small hospital room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the heartbeat of a child who'd almost slipped away, we both found what we'd been searching for all along. Not success, not security, just meaning. But even love, I would soon learn, doesn't protect you from the storms that come next. And the one heading toward us was about to test everything we'd just found. We'd just found peace when the world tried to take it away again, because success has a cruel way of testing whether love can survive the fire it once rose from. It began like any other Monday, sunlight spilling through the glass walls of my office, the city humming below. And for once, a sense of calm settling over everything. Miguel was back from Frankfurt. Sophia was healthy. And for the first time in years, I'd started to believe I could have both, a thriving company and a life that actually meant something. But peace never lasts long in the world of power. By noon, the first tremors hit. Jennifer burst into my office, her normally calm voice trembling. "Victoria, you need to see this." She handed me a folder marked Urgent, Blackstone Industries. The moment I opened it, my breath caught. Blackstone, our most aggressive rival, had just announced a hostile takeover bid for Sterling Dynamics, 30% above our market valuation. To any investor, it was a dream offer. To me, it was a knife aimed at the heart of everything I'd built. "They've been buying up shares quietly for weeks," Jennifer said. "They already hold 12%. The rest of the board is unsettled." Unsettled was an understatement. By the time the emergency board meeting convened that afternoon, the room was thick with panic and whispered calculations. 30% above market, said Harold Winters, one of our senior board members, tapping his pen against the table. For shareholders, that's an irresistible profit. Another chimed in. Blackstone is offering guaranteed payouts. If we refuse, our stock could crash. I listened in silence, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Every number, every projection, all of it was designed to make surrender look like strategy. Finally, I stood. If we sell to Blackstone, Sterling Dynamics dies. They don't buy companies. They strip them. They'll dismantle everything we've built, every job, every innovation. You know that. The room went quiet, but I could see the fear in their eyes. Logic rarely wins against greed. Then the doors opened, and Miguel walked in. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a storm. Sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, eyes burning with purpose. The room straightened instinctively. Even the board members who once doubted him now leaned forward, waiting for what he'd say. "Mrs. Sterling asked me to join," he said calmly, "because I think we're looking at this the wrong way." He took the seat beside me, laid out a stack of papers, and began speaking, not as a strategist, but as someone who understood the human side of business. Blackstone sees Sterling Dynamics as an American company with international clients, he began, his voice steady and sure. But we've become something else, a global family. Our partners in Shanghai, Frankfurt, Milan, they don't work with us because of numbers. They work with us because of trust, relationships, understanding. That's something Blackstone can't buy. He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him lit up with charts, international partnerships, projected growth, letters of intent from our overseas investors. These aren't just contracts, he said. They're commitments. People across the world have invested in us because they believe in our way of doing business. They believe in sterling values, empathy, collaboration, integrity. One of the skeptical board members frowned. "Nice sentiment, Mr. Santos, but that doesn't protect us from a takeover." Miguel smiled slightly. "No, but this does." He switched slides again. What appeared next made even the most cynical executives sit up straighter, a proposal outlining a global partnership reinvestment program. If our international allies buy stakes directly into Sterling Dynamics, Miguel continued, we dilute Blackstone's control. We turn their aggression into our advantage. In 72 hours, we can become too international to acquire. The boardroom buzzed. Patricia, our CFO, adjusted her glasses, scanning the data. These projections, they could work. If even half of these partners commit, we'll outvalue the takeover bid. Miguel leaned forward, his tone soft but commanding. Gentlemen, ladies, Sterling Dynamics was built on the belief that business is personal, that trust is the most valuable currency. Blackstone deals in profit. We deal in people. Which one do you think lasts longer? The silence that followed wasn't uncertainty. It was awe. I watched him, unable to look away. The same man who once mopped our floors was now commanding a room full of millionaires, not with arrogance, but with conviction. His words carried a force I'd never heard from anyone, not even myself. Harold, who'd been silent for most of the meeting, finally spoke. You know, in 40 years of boardrooms, I've seen a lot of men talk about saving companies. Very few actually mean it. Mr. Santos, I think you just saved ours. Miguel gave a small nod. I didn't save it. We all did. Together. But everyone knew the truth. He had led the charge. The tension broke like a wave. Applause erupted across the room, the sound echoing off glass walls and polished marble. Board members who'd been seconds from betrayal now clapped for the man they once ignored. I should have been relieved. I should have joined them. But I couldn't move. Because while everyone else saw a corporate savior, I saw the man who had become the heartbeat of everything I cared about. My company, my purpose, my life. He turned toward me, our eyes locking across the chaos. And in that moment, I didn't see a janitor or an executive. I saw the man who had taught me that leadership wasn't about control. It was about faith. The boardroom erupted in applause, but I could only see him, standing there beneath the flood of light, unaware that he hadn't just saved my company again. He'd saved me. One more time. We had 72 hours to save the company. 3 days to protect everything we'd built, everything we'd sacrificed, and everything we were finally brave enough to hope for. Those 3 days felt like a lifetime, compressed into sleepless hours. The boardroom victory had been only the beginning. Miguel had made a promise, one that would test every ounce of strength he had, to secure enough global investments to make Sterling Dynamics untouchable. And he meant to keep it. By dawn, the next morning, he had turned my office into a command center. The long mahogany table was buried under laptops, coffee cups, and printouts in 5 different languages. Video calls flickered across multiple screens, time zones blending into chaos. Miguel, I said quietly, stepping into the room with 2 cups of coffee. You've been at this for 16 hours straight. He looked up briefly, dark circles under his eyes, but his expression was steady. Every minute counts, he said. Asia's awake now. Europe follows in 4 hours. We can't slow down. I set a cup in front of him. Then at least drink this. He gave me a tired smile, that same calm, reassuring one that somehow made even the impossible feel manageable. Thank you. He turned back to the screen where Chen Wei, CEO of the Chen Corporation, appeared live from Shanghai. Miguel switched seamlessly into Mandarin, his tone respectful but firm. Mr. Chen, he said, we are in the middle of a hostile takeover attempt. I won't pretend this is business as usual. But you once told me that great partnerships are built on respect. Sterling Dynamics will not be sold to those who see you as numbers. We see you as family. Mr. Chen listened quietly, then nodded. Family deserves loyalty, he replied in Mandarin. I will invest $10 million for exclusive development rights in Southeast Asia. We stand with Sterling Dynamics. Miguel exhaled slowly, his composure unshaken, but his relief visible in the small smile that followed. Thank you, Mr. Chen. You've just helped us keep our promise to integrity. As soon as the call ended, he was on to the next, Frankfurt, then Milan, then São Paulo. I watched him navigate each conversation with the same mixture of grace and grit. He wasn't begging for help or pitching numbers. He was telling a story about a company built not on greed, but on trust. By the end of the first 24 hours, he'd secured 30 million in commitments. But the exhaustion was beginning to show. His voice grew hoarse, his shoulders slumped, his tie hung loose. Still, he refused to stop. "Get some rest," I urged. "Later," he said, eyes glued to the screen. "Brazil's next." When Roberto Vasquez, CEO of Latina Solutions, appeared on the video feed, Miguel switched to Spanish without missing a beat. The warmth in his tone carried the weight of shared experience. "Roberto," he said, "you know my story. You know where I started. This company believed in me when I was invisible. I need your help to make sure it survives, not for me, but for the thousands of people who depend on it." Roberto leaned back in his chair, studying him for a long moment. "You represent something important, Miguel. The American dream, but rewritten. A version that finally includes people like us." He smiled. "Latina Solutions will invest 15 million. Miguel closed his eyes briefly, murmuring, "Gracias." By the end of day 2, the total had climbed to $47 million in international commitments. Blackstone's offer was officially outmatched. But Miguel didn't celebrate. He didn't even rest. Instead, he scheduled one final call, a global video conference that brought every partner together, from Shanghai to São Paulo. When the screens filled with faces from around the world, I realized we were witnessing something historic. Miguel stood at the head of the table, no longer the man who once mopped these floors, but the man who now led the people who owned them. His voice carried across the digital space, steady, sincere, alive with conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "Sterling Dynamics was built on connection. We've proven that language barriers, cultural gaps, and even borders can't stop people who choose to understand one another. That's why we're still here. Not because we're the richest, but because we're the most human." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "Blackstone offered money, we offer meaning, and I think we all know which one lasts longer." Applause erupted from every screen. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, not pride, not relief, but awe. He wasn't just saving a company, he was redefining what leadership looked like. When the call ended, the boardroom was silent. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Harold stood, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been in business for 40 years, he said, "and I've never seen anything like that. Son, you didn't just stop a takeover, you created a legacy." The entire room rose to its feet, applause filling the space until it vibrated in the glass walls. I stood off to the side, watching him. Miguel smiled humbly, shaking hands, thanking people, but his eyes eventually found mine across the chaos. For a heartbeat, everything else disappeared. He didn't need to say a word. I already knew what he was thinking. We did it. When the board reconvened that evening, the vote was unanimous. Sterling Dynamics would remain independent. As the others left, I lingered by the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. Miguel joined me quietly, his reflection beside mine in the glass. 3 days, I said softly. You saved the company in 3 days. He shook his head. We saved it. I turned toward him. His face was illuminated by the city's glow. Exhaustion etched into every line, but beneath it, peace, the kind that comes when you've given everything and finally earned rest. Do you realize what you've done? I asked. He smiled faintly. Just kept a promise. We stood there in silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. Outside, Dallas stretched endlessly beneath us, alive, awake, and safe again. For everyone else, it was the end of a crisis. For me, it was something entirely different. Because as I watched Miguel Santos, the man who'd once been invisible, now commanding the respect of a global network, I realized that this was more than a business victory. It was the culmination of 2 lives that had collided at exactly the right moment. As the applause faded, and the lights dimmed, I realized the victory I wanted most wasn't in that boardroom. It wasn't a contract, a partnership, or even a company. It was waiting for me after, in the quiet promise of a man who had already given me everything that truly mattered. Some endings are too beautiful to call endings, because sometimes, when life finally gives you peace, it's not a conclusion at all, but the beginning of everything you were always meant to find. It was raining softly the morning Miguel asked me to meet him at the cafe, the same small corner place where his story at Sterling Dynamics had quietly begun. I remembered that cafe well. He used to take Sophia there for treats on Fridays, back when money was tight and dreams were far away. It had smelled of espresso, hope, and unspoken promises even then. Now, months later, when I walked through its doors again, it felt like stepping into a memory rewritten in color. The air was still filled with warmth. The same faint music played over the speakers, and sitting at our usual table, the one near the window, was Miguel. No longer the janitor in a faded uniform, but the man who'd saved not just a company, but every soul within it. He stood as I approached, his smile as familiar as it was steady. "You're late," he teased softly. I smiled back. "You're early," he chuckled. Some habits die hard. For a while, we didn't speak. The world outside moved slowly, raindrops tracing lines down the glass, the city humming beyond the window. It was a silence that didn't need words, the kind that only exists between two people who've already said everything that matters without speaking. Finally, he reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. I nodded. "Every day." He exhaled, his voice soft. "When I first came here, I used to sit at this table after night shifts. I'd drink coffee I couldn't afford and imagine what life could be like if I ever got another chance. I thought those days were gone. And then, you saw me." I felt my throat tighten. "You gave me something too, Miguel. You reminded me what it felt like to feel. To believe that compassion and strength can exist in the same space. I thought I'd forgotten how." He looked down, smiling shyly, as if uncertain what to do with the weight of my words. "You know," he said after a moment, "in every language I speak, there's a word for gratitude. But none of them feel big, enough for what I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," I said gently. He shook his head. "Maybe not, but I still want to give you something." He reached into his pocket, and when he pulled his hand back, there was a small velvet box. My breath caught. "Victoria," he said, his voice trembling just slightly. "You saw a man pushing a mop and somehow recognized someone who could be more. You gave me a second life, and somewhere between saving that company and learning how to live again, I fell in love with you." Tears blurred my vision before I could stop them. He continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't promise you a perfect life, but I can promise you something real. Love that doesn't depend on titles or deals or success, just us. As we are." He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, elegant, understated, timeless. I covered my mouth with my hand, laughing through the tears. "Miguel." He stood, moving to one knee. "Will you marry me?" The cafe went silent. The sound of rain outside softened. And in that suspended moment, I realized there had never been a more certain answer in my life. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I will." The joy in his face was something I'll never forget. He rose, taking my hands, pressing his forehead to mine. Outside, the rain had stopped, and sunlight spilled through the clouds as if the world itself had been waiting for our yes. 2 months later, under a wide Texas sky painted in gold and lavender, we were married on the rooftop of Sterling Dynamics. The place that had once been my fortress, now transformed into a garden of celebration. The air was filled with the murmur of languages from around the world: Mandarin, Spanish, German, Portuguese, and English blending like music. Our partners, our employees, our friends, all gathered where it had all begun. Miguel stood at the altar in a charcoal suit, Sophia beside him, radiant in her flower girl dress, scattering petals across the floor. When I stepped forward, she beamed up at me. "You look like a queen, Miss Victoria." I smiled down at her. "And you, Sophia, look like my favorite little angel." The ceremony began. Miguel took my hands in his, and when he spoke, his voice carried through the evening air with quiet strength. "I, Miguel, promise to love you in 3 languages," he said. "In English, because it's the language of the life we built together. In Spanish, because it's the language of my heart. And in Mandarin, because it reminds me that understanding is what brought us together." There wasn't a dry eye on that rooftop. When it was my turn, my voice shook, but I spoke from the truest part of myself. "You showed me that power means nothing without purpose, that success means nothing without love. You didn't just save my company, Miguel. You saved me." He smiled, eyes shining. Then we saved each other. As the vows ended, the music rose, soft mariachi strings mingling with piano and violin, and we kissed for the first time as husband and wife, surrounded by the very people who had once doubted both of us. Sophia clapped first, her laughter carrying into the night, and soon the entire rooftop erupted in applause. Mr. Chen and Klaus Miller stood near the front, both men wiping their eyes. Jennifer handed me a glass of champagne with a wink. Under the glow of string lights, as the stars began to bloom above Dallas, I looked around at the faces, janitors, executives, engineers, partners from every corner of the world, all gathered not for profit, but for something far more powerful: connection. We danced that night beneath the open sky, laughter mixing with the hum of distant traffic, the city lights below like a constellation built by human hands. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a promise. To build differently, to live differently, to never again mistake achievement for joy. And as Miguel pulled me close, whispering "Te amo" against my ear, I knew that this was the true legacy of Sterling Dynamics. Not the buildings or the contracts, but the people who dared to believe in each other. Because in the end, the most powerful empires aren't built with money. They're built with faith, courage, and love. And ours, I knew, would last for generations. If this story touched your heart the way it did mine, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button and join me for more true-to-life stories about courage, love, and second chances. Share this video with someone who still believes that kindness can change everything. Because sometimes, one moment, one person, can rewrite an entire life. And trust me, the next story is even more powerful.